Guy behind me in traffic was blinding me with his high beams, so I violated his retinas with the full force of the afternoon sun. I was driving home from work and traffic was backed up pretty bad for a few miles. It was stop and go, and when I get stuck like that, I usually back about 75 feet off the car in front of me, and then I can hold that pace and move at a slow but constant roll, like semi-trucks do. This way I'm not participating in the bumper to bumper move and brake like the rest of the smooth brain drivers. Some dude in an Acura crossover was behind me, and I guess he was getting upset because I wasn't 2 feet from the car in front of me, driving like a smooth brain. So he gets all up in my butt and starts beeping his horn at me. LOL, I think to myself as I turn up my radio. But then he starts flashing his brights at me, which is where I get annoyed. He's in one of those Acuras that has the super bright LED headlights. My car is much lower than his, so his low beams are already pretty bright in my mirrors. Bright enough that I don't want to look in them. The first time he flashed his high beams, it put spots in my vision for a moment. It genuinely hurt my eyes. After the first flash, he waits about 10 seconds, beeps his horn, and then flashes me again. Now I'm getting pissed. I'm thinking, where the hell do you want me to go? Do you really think being 2 feet from the car in front of you makes traffic move faster? Then he flashes me a third time, but this time he held them for about 15 seconds. Time for the gloves to come off. During those 15 seconds, as I'm looking away from my mirrors, I see my 14,000 lumen searchlight sitting in my passenger seat, at which point I'm immediately overcome by a wave of chaotic, lawful excitement. What he has just set in motion cannot be stopped. I think to myself, ho buddy, you just opened the wrong can of worms. You're going to learn today. I grab my flashlight and set it to the absolute max 14,000 lumen brightness setting. The flashlight has a sensor in it to automatically dim the light if facing down on the table, because otherwise the diodes would get so hot that they would melt the lens. The 14,000 lumen setting is so intense that the 57 watt-hour battery can only hold it for 180 seconds before the flashlight automatically notches down to a measly 9,500 lumens. During those 180 seconds, the light will burn through 15% of its battery. For reference on just how bright that is, the literal freaking sun emits a luminosity of 11,000 lumens per square foot on a bright and clear day. I turn around and aim it straight out the back of my rear window. My car is pretty noisy, so before I turn it on, I rev up my engine to make sure Captain Smoothbrain is eyes forward when I violate his retinas with the full force of the afternoon sun. I hit the power button and I can only imagine the freight train of shock and pain that plowed over this man. It was so bright that his automatic headlight shut off, because the car thought it was daytime. With the lights on, I could see him clear as glass through the tinted windshield. He was covering his eyes and looking down, probably screaming. I watched him try and flip his sun visor down, but he couldn't find it, as I thought to myself, burn, mother trucker, burn. I imagine my facial expression was similar to that of a 6-year-old roasting insects with a magnifying glass on a bright summer day. After about 5 seconds of blinding light, I took mercy on him and shut it off. He proceeded to back way the hell off and move to a different lane. Was this the unsafe thing for me to do? Absolutely. Was it illegal? Almost certainly. Was it warranted? Without question. Possibly the highlight of my career. Drive safe, don't be a jerk to the car in front of you, because they might have the tools to teach you a lesson. Do I condone this action? No. Do I find it hilarious? Yes. This is one of the best posts I've ever read. I hate those bright ass LED lights, man. They kill me. Leave me for dead? I'll destroy your fraternity. This is longer than I intended it to be, but F it. After high school ended, I was in a pretty bad place mentally, so I decided to make some extremely unwise decisions during my first year of college. I was basically always on something in order to keep what I later realized was severe depression at bay. For a variety of misplaced reasons, I also decided to join a fraternity. It was a convenient way to keep getting the things that I thought I needed at the time, but mostly I just craved human connection in a way that I thought being a quote brother would bring. Well, I didn't see it for a while, but I was wrong. The fraternity had a house on campus that was allocated to them, but it might as well have been off campus because of how crazy the parties were. Campus police would rarely pass by, let alone come in, no matter how much noise was being made. Still, that made it the perfect place for me. I could let loose and escape the sadness that followed me around during the day without being bothered. And the people there seemed to like me well enough that they at least tolerated my being around so often. At first it was just, quote, official parties on the weekends, and then every weekend, Thursday nights, Wednesday night, until at one point I was spending hours drinking there every night of the week to hide from myself. Before I knew it, my first semester was over, and the shallow friendships that I had made through the bonds of getting ridiculously messed up had started to pay off. Or so I thought. They told me that they were extending an offer to me as a pledge next semester, For those who don't know, pledging is a process that lasts, for this particular chapter of this fraternity, 1 semester, and it's something that you have to go through officially to become a brother, aka a member of the fraternity. I was ecstatic. My second semester rolls around, and I'm given the invitation in traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity fashion. Once again, I was ecstatic. The thought that I was actually wanted and valued by these people, who I had thought I had it all figured out, felt like it'd be the highlight of my year. I never really fit in with most members of the fraternity, probably because other than excessive consumption of drugs and alcohol, we really didn't have that much in common. But I started to look up to these guys. While most of the time they passed me by in a haze of my own creation, the moments that I remembered made it seem like these guys were kind, cool, and genuine people. Although most of my quote friendships during the year were with people from this particular fraternity, I had made some friends in my own dorm hall as well. One night after pre-gaming in somebody else's dorm, I was happy for any excuse to start drinking at 3 p.m. A couple of girls came up to me. They asked why I was pledging with this particular frat, given its reputation, why someone as nice as me would want to be around people like that. I asked what they were talking about. They told me that this particular frat house has a reputation as a place where girls shouldn't get too drunk. Trying not to be as graphic as possible here. I told them that it must be a rumor that started because of guys who had already graduated, because there was no way that any of my brothers I knew would do anything like that. I second guessed my sense of belonging for the first time that night, but I was too starved for human connection to seriously consider that I might not be making the best choices. Still, a small crack had formed in the facade that I had built around these people. Another night I had overheard a couple of brothers talking when I woke up to use the bathroom, talking about how they desperately needed members to keep the house, and how it was a shame that they had to let me become a brother at the end of the semester, because they normally never let someone like me in. Fine, I thought. That's how these three feel, but most of the others like me, and actually want me here. Wrong. But my life was in pieces before I got to college, and I was so desperate for friends, and a sense of belonging that I was willing to rationalize anything to keep the lie going. One night while doing a traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity event, aka consuming copious amounts of alcohol to the point of serious risk, for brothers and pledges only, I did what was expected of me, and well, consumed copious amounts of alcohol, to the point of serious risk. For anonymity's sake, I won't describe the event, but I was in and out blacking out for a while until a certain point when I stopped remembering anything. Over the years though, some of the things have come back to me and I've tried to process this experience. I've had flashes of being turned over and somehow holding my head up so I could throw up in a trash can and not on myself or the chair I was on. There's a slideshow of me fall walking down half the stairs. One of the last things I remember is asking to stay the night in one of my brother's rooms because I knew, somehow, that I was ridiculously drunk and didn't want to get caught on the way back to mine. He said no. He was my closest friend there. It should have been clear to anyone that I wasn't safe, but these guys were still giving me crappy light beer instead of water because it's basically the same thing. I'll never get that line, or the laughter that followed, out of my head. Instead of getting me help, or even just letting me stay there, one of my brothers took me back to my dorm. Luckily for me, an RA saw me being brought in, essentially over his shoulder, and felt like I was in danger, so she called for help. Even after all these years, the last thing I remember from that night is a knock at my door of my dorm. When I woke up, I was in the hospital the next morning, and I was told I could have died. They described how I acted, and it was clear to me after just hearing about it, I was in danger. My BAC, blood alcohol concentration, was at a 0.37, and somehow still more in my stomach that I hadn't thrown up before they had pumped it. For reference, alcohol poisoning can cause death and generally shows up around 0.3, while 0.4 is potentially fatal on its own because heart or lungs can stop working. My RA almost certainly saved my life. I made an excuse that I just wanted to update them, but I was tired and still recovering, so I could go back to my dorm. I stewed in anger and resentment for hours. I thought about all the things I had experienced, all the warning signs, and I made a plan. First, I set up a new email account and got the facility head of disciplinary committee. Calling him committee head now because the full title is annoying to type out every time. A guy who apparently really hated the presence of fraternity on campus housing. I told him I was a student who had information about crimes committed by the members of this particular fraternity, and I wanted them gone. Not just from their house, but from the school. I also talked to one of the girls who took me aside in my dorm, one I felt I could trust, and asked if she or anybody she knew had experiences, names, anything. She wasn't willing to step forward personally, but she knew someone who was and helped me get in touch. 3 days later, I met with the committee head at 4 a.m. in someone else's office. I didn't want to be seen because I didn't want anybody else to know what was going on or have any heads up. I asked him what he needed to take their house, and he told me. He amended the report that I gave to the original disciplinary officer to include 2, quote, accidental mentions of a particularly relatively uncommon alcohol, which is one this fraternity uses for their stupid traditional ritualistic fraternity-only drinking events. For what it's worth, the alcohol was actually present, so it wasn't exactly a lie. Apparently that was enough for an investigation and wouldn't need me to be involved any more than I already was, which was something I insisted on. The investigation merely being open was enough for one anonymous tip to say where certain quantities of drugs were likely to be hidden within the frat house. It was also enough for campus police to come knocking with real police in tow to tear the place apart if enough was found the first time. Remember, the house is owned by the school, so as long as the school gives permission to police to search and they have enough reason to, they're good to go. I also got in contact with a brave girl who was willing to come forward with her story. I don't know if she ever got real justice, but I know that one member of the frat suddenly dropped out between the first time I met with a committee head and when the police came. I hope she did. I made myself scarce around the frat house for a month or so with the excuse that I needed to stop drinking. I didn't stop, at least at that point, but I needed some reason for my distance. Even though I wasn't as around as often as I once was, I did spend some time there to put various amounts of coke, Xanax, MDMA, ketamine, and LSD in places that people wouldn't look until the time was right. I'd never been a rich guy, so it wasn't much, but pretty much every other room had enough for a minor possession charge thanks to my generosity. When the house was eventually got flipped and the drugs were found, I dropped out because despite my best attempts to hide it, at that point most of the brothers were keeping me at arm's length and looking at me with suspicion. It was at the end of my semester anyway, and I'd gone from doing fairly well in my first semester to failing most of my classes around the second. I still got to see some of them dragged out of the house in handcuffs, so it was worth it. When it was all said and done, the frat house was essentially raided twice, and at least 3 of my brothers dropped out while facing serious possession charges that I had nothing to do with. Those were their drugs. And the rest of them had to separate, moving into dorms or already scarce off-campus housing where the fraternity was banned by the school from ever having an official on-campus house for the next decade. Many of them also got minor possession charges on their own, or thanks to me. This was almost a decade ago now, and I don't regret any of it, all apart from the fact that I didn't do something sooner. Eventually I got help for my mental health, and I no longer abused drugs or alcohol to cope with the pain. I also transferred away from that terrible school with just one good semester on my transcript, though I never got around to finishing my degree because I spent years in a self-destructive spiral and all my money on therapy to pull myself out. I just hope what I did made it at least slightly less likely for others not to be in danger, one way or another. And that all the people who deserved it got what was coming to them. The pessimist in me doubts it, but I'd like to think that they did. At the very least, I know that the fraternity doesn't have any presence at my former school anymore. Seems like it's kind of hard to get new recruits when you lose the only thing you had going for you, and your already crappy reputation gets worse. I know this post was really long, but it was a roller coaster of emotions. Honestly, I just had to cover it. It was insane how OP almost died and then he kind of low-key came back and got his revenge and then left the college while everything was in shambles. 10 out of 10 posts. Loved it. If you've gotten this far, thank you so much for watching the video. We really do appreciate it. And if you would, please like, comment, subscribe, let us know what you think about it, and join us in the next video. Peace. It seems like it's hard to...